in accounting, a large part of the job may be working in budgets, depending on what corporation you end up working for. And if you're working in a factory that produces a good, a part of that budgeting is something called the labor budget. Now, you define the labor budget as you take the A of P, which is the actual number of hours worked to complete this unit, or these units, multiply it by the A of Q, which is the amount of money we actually paid our workers. And then we compare that to the S of P, which is the amount of hours that we budgeted this project to take, multiplied by the S of Q, which is the amount of money we budgeted to pay our workers. The problem with this comparison is you are comparing 4 independent variables. And so when you get this large number, it's hard to tell. Did we make money because people completed the job faster? Did we lose money because we ended up paying people more? And so that's why in the middle, you add a third variable type, where you take the A of P times the S of Q, or the amount of hours worked times the amount of money we budgeted to pay people. And so if we say that the A of P is 100, and the S of Q is $10, and the S of P is 150, the S of Q will stay at $10. The only thing that changed here is the A of P and the S of P. And so we can say we spent $1,000 over here, and we were budgeting to spend $1,500 over here. When we compare these, and we have a $500 favorable variance, and we know that this $500 was specifically saved because it took 50 less hours to work. And it's this comparison that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm Kyle Niemeyer, and this is 4 different ways to help increase labor efficiency in your company, industry, organization, wherever you happen to work. Now, not all 4 of these ideas are applicable in every situation, but at least one of them should be useful no matter where you end up working. Now, these four ways I divided into 2 categories. 2 of them I'm labeling as passive, and 2 of them I'm labeling as active. By passive, I simply mean that it is 100% up to the employee to complete this. Management cannot force this to happen. Whereas, by active, I mean that management can force things to happen, because it is major changes in how the company works. The first way, which is passive, to increase labor efficiency is through something called the learning curve. Now, the learning curve, as Stephen Braggs, a CPA who has written multiple books on accounting, he describes it as a visual representation on how employees will at first slowly gain efficiency, or will at first quickly gain efficiency, but over time those gains will slow and eventually stop and plateau. The learning curve presents itself at work as you get to know the machinery better, and so you know how to shortcut a couple of steps maybe, or you're able to move stuff along the line better, and so this shaves down time. But eventually you can't save any more time, because that process, it might take absolutely 1 hour for the machinery to do its job, and so you can't get any less than an hour, no matter how hard you try. Now, the pros of the learning curve is it is relatively inexpensive to implement. In fact, it shouldn't really cost the company anything, because it's the employees getting better at their job the more they do it. However, the learning curve is an estimation, and we know that as humans, we have on days and we have off days. There are certain tasks we're better at than others. And so the learning curve is not a set standard that everyone can adhere to 100% of the time. It's a flexible thing that sometimes doesn't work out. And so you don't want to completely rely on the learning curve. You just want to understand that it exists, and over time people do get better at their jobs. The second way to help increase labor efficiency, which is also passive, is training. Now, Kimberly Leonard, a writer on the business website, cron.com, states that training, it can be either generalized for the entire company or specific for a department or group of employees. The important part is that the more an employee knows about their job, the better they get at it. For example, in Accounting 455 here at Mount Union, we are all enrolled in something called Excel University. Excel University trains us on how to use Excel better as accountants. Now, at the beginning of the semester, say I was in a job and my boss walks up to me and he says, "Kyle, I need to know how much the shipping department spent last month, and I need it on my desk by the end of the day." Well, now I have to pull up the spreadsheet that says how many transactions happened last month. And because we're a big corporation, there are tens of thousands of them. And so now I got to spend all day searching through, finding shipping department, highlighting it, hoping I had everything up correctly. And I come out with a number, we'll say about 100 grand was spent. And so 5 minutes before closing, I run up to my boss and say, "We spent 100 grand in shipping." Doesn't tell him where this money went. And because I spent all day looking for this data instead of using it, I wasn't as best of an employee as I could have been. Whereas now with Excel University, I can use functions and features like pivot tables. And so now I can spend less time looking for this data and information and spend more time using it. And so now I can walk up to my boss and say, "Look, we spent $100,000, but about 20 grand went to shipping to company A, 30 grand to company B, about 5 grand was used buying boxes and tape." And I can provide a nice breakdown as to where these numbers went and why. And so with training, you do get better with your job. But why would I list training as passive? Well, imagine next Wednesday is the big game. You've been hyped for it for like the last 3 months, let's say. And then the week before, your boss walks up and says, "Look, mandatory training next Wednesday. Be there or it's your third strike and you're fired." Well, there went your Wednesday plans, the big game that you wanted to see. And so you show up to training Wednesday like you're supposed to, except you sit in the back, don't pay attention, and you don't learn anything. And now we've wasted company resources and company time in a project that you didn't want to learn about. And that's why training is passive. Employees need to be interested in what they're learning, or else they're not going to learn anything. And you can't force people to learn. You can just force them to attend. And so when the training is interesting and engaging and it's something that they want to go to, training can be a great help. And it's usually fairly inexpensive in the long run. You only have to hire someone for a day or delegate it to one of your employees to talk about the subject who's more knowledgeable on it. But if it's too mandatory, too boring, or if it's on the wrong topic, no one wants to be there, no one's going to learn anything, and now you've just wasted everyone's time. Now, the third way was something created by Frederick W. Taylor. Now, Frederick W. Taylor is a graduate from the Stanford Institution of Technology, and in 1881, he implemented something called time study to the Midvale steel plant that he worked at. Now, the theory behind time study is that through close observation of your employees, you can eliminate wasted time and motions in their work, overall enhancing their efficiency. Now, let's say, for example, you have 3 people in a line, and it's a production line, and so the conveyor belt comes up and it stops in front of all 3 of them, and so they gotta pick up wrenches, twist 2 bolts, put the wrenches down, pick up the first stamp, pick up the hammer, hammer the first stamp, put the first stamp down, pick up the second stamp, hammer the second stamp, put the second stamp down, put the hammer down, wait for the other two to finish their work, wait for the next 3 items to line up in front of them, pick up the wrenches, and start all over again. There's a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted motions in that system. Now, after Taylor comes through, it would look something more like the conveyor belt's constantly moving. The first person, their only job, twist those 2 bolts. Second person, their only job, hit the first stamp. Third person, their only job, hit that second stamp. And now the conveyor belt's constantly moving and production has increased. And this is why Taylor became known as the hero of the corporation. Because now they are producing more units a day, more units a year, for the same price. They didn't hire anyone, they didn't pay anyone anymore, they didn't buy any new equipment. Their employees are just working harder every day. But on the flip side, he became known as the villain of the working class. Because these companies, when they take it to the extreme, they're working 2-3 times as hard for the same amount of pay. And so they get to sit there on the conveyor belt, watch all these units fly by, and they know that their bosses are making so much more money now, but they're not making any more money. And so they get disgruntled. And so time study and the elimination of these steps and motions, it is good, and you want to eliminate this wasted time because you want your workers working for the entire 8 hours or so that they're there. But 100% efficiency, whereas it's good for your checkbook, isn't always good for the employees, especially if they're not getting any additional compensation for this extra work they're doing. And so you just need to make sure that you're balancing your employee morale with how efficient you actually want your workplace to be. Now, the fourth way to increase labor efficiency is also active. And this is what I call rearranging the production lines. When I was originally thinking of being a mechanical engineer, I job shadowed at my uncle's plant that he worked at. Now, one of the people that I job shadowed, their entire job was to simply walk around the factory floor and take notes. Are any of the production lines backed up? Do we have enough storage? Too much storage? If we move anything around, can we add more production lines? Can we move the production lines around in order to increase efficiency? In fact, while I was job shadowing, he told me of a job that was going on that he had, where there was a process that required 3 employees to complete, and he was tasked with getting it down to 2 employees. And this is where labor efficiency is very important. You see, let's say that he does complete this. Now, currently minimum wage in 2019 is $8.55 an hour. And so if we take $8.55 times, let's say, a 40-hour work week, it comes up to a little over $800 a week, or a little over $300 a week is spent in labor wages. But if you take that $300 or so and multiply it by 52 for the entire year, the company is spending almost 18 grand in wages for just one person at minimum wage if they work 40 hours a week. And so removing this one person, it'll be the difference between being able to invest in new equipment or maybe just barely making it through the end of the year with a profit. And so rearranging, it can be helpful, and if you're able to eliminate unneeded workers, it can save a lot of money in the long run. However, just because you're saving almost 18 grand because you removed this one person, if you take this 3-person job and make it a 2-person job, well, because of labor inefficiency, because you have less people working here, you could be, say, losing $19,000 a year in lost production. And so you need to be careful that as you're removing workers from the equation, that you're not hindering your output at the same time. Because you can easily see salaries going down, or the salary payments going down, but it can sometimes be harder to see your units sold at the end of the month going down. The other problem with rearranging is if you wanted to rearrange the production line, it is hands down the most expensive way, because you have to completely shut down that production line if you want to rearrange it. And then you've got to hope that when you turn that line back on, you didn't create more problems and bottlenecks than you solved. Increasing labor efficiency, like I said, it's important. It should be on every manager's mind. And these 4 ways, the learning curve, training, time study, and rearranging, they're all important to know and important to know how to do. But the other part of it is knowing what is too much and what is too far. Because any one of these options, when taken too far, will end up hurting the company in the long run. And so it's important as accountants and as managers to understand that line and that boundary in order to get that peak efficiency without hurting the company in the long run. Thank you.